I'm thrilled to be talking today with Kianti Brown Whitney. She's currently the Vice President of Marketing and Communications at Relay. Relay is a graduate school of education, and the mission of Relay is to educate leaders and teachers. In fact, over 15,000 of them across the country. Prior to joining Relay, she's worked in many different organizations, including a charter management organization, a financial institution, and multiple advertising agencies. Her passion is to bring forward the stories of marginalized groups, especially people of color, and it's to showcase how new narratives can move us forward. Very relevant, I think, to our conversation today. She's a graduate of UC, University of California, San Diego, which is where I'm from. And she got her MBA from Rice University in marketing. I'm so excited to have you here, Kianti. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me. So good to be here, Analiza.
And Kianti, talk about your identity and specifically how you see yourself with the race or any of these influences, because going into education isn't, I find it's usually not accidental. There's usually a passion piece. Could you
Oh,
talk
yeah.
about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I identify as a Black woman, a very proud Black woman. And I legit stumbled into education. I don't think I really realized how fortunate I was. I do know it was a big focus for my family, particularly my father. I grew up, they call it South LA now, South Central when I was growing up. And my dad refused to put any of us, there are four of us, any of us into the public school system, which that's a different story for a different time, but he just felt like we would be held back, that we wouldn't be living up to our potential. And so they made a great deal of sacrifice to make sure that we went to private school. So I went to private school from preschool all the way up through high school. So I didn't realize, I don't think, how fortunate I was to have that access. And then going on to UCSD, as you know, that is a very white institution. Then I started to realize, ooh, there's some gaps here. Oh, there's some things I just didn't learn, not even just academically, but socially, that I had to kind of figure out. And so I think that's what kind of helped me find my way to education when I felt like I wasn't being fulfilled in financial services. Surprise, surprise. Right. Like I had a couple of friends that worked in education and I was like, wait, I can do marketing here, because that's all I ever wanted to do was marketing, storytelling, advertising. So when I realized there was an opportunity for me to do it in a way that would, impact other people, people that looked like me, people that, didn't necessarily have the opportunity to get access to the education, like I jumped at the opportunity.
The parallel there as well, having been in corporate worlds and then realizing that our passion isn't there, and how can we use our passion
That's right.
towards something we care about. And you and I both share education. So let's talk Chianti, because there were these myths that you just debunked. One here is that there are these lines and careers, and that we think that we're going to follow one straight path. And I'm curious for you, looking back and having now had this really nice, varied, and quite, great role now, is there anything that you realize was a myth,
Mm.
but didn't realize that it was a myth until, these past years? Anything that comes up for you, especially as women of color, that you really wish that
Yeah.
you known earlier?
Oh my gosh, so many things. I think one of the things that I think we're perpetuated even within our own community is you take what you're given, right? And so that can be very damaging, especially as women of color going into the workforce, right? Because they give you a number. Let's just talk about negotiating salary, for example, right? Like, of course, they give you a starting number. Everybody knows. Well, maybe not everybody knows, right? What I now know is the number they start with is certainly not the cap, right? Like, there's a lot of room for negotiation there, but I wasn't necessarily taught that, right? It was something that I learned over time. And thank God, right? I went to undergrad. I talked earlier with a lot of white people who knew that. So I was clued in. So when I got my first job, I knew to ask for more money. And what's interesting is I was told no in the beginning. So I think they offer, I can't even remember at this stage. It was, I'll be dating myself. That was like in the year 2000. But they offered me a certain number and just not even thinking about it, right? I like I was like, no, I deserve 10% more. And they were like, oh, no, no, no. This is the number. You're working in advertising. Nobody gets paid more money than this. And me, this is where being young and smug comes in it, comes in into my favor, because I was like, oh, I'll just find something else. Don't worry about it. It's like, well, this is my number. I'm not moving. And guess what? They matched my number. And so that kind of gave me, the confidence to keep doing that. And I've been able to successfully do that without my career. Now, do I always hit the number that I want? Absolutely not. But I always I've learned over time to ask for more than I actually want to get. And then, usually meet somewhere in the middle. But yeah, that is definitely a huge myth.
So tell me, Kianti, because it's quite moving that you learned this skill that early in your career.
Yeah.
Because the reality is, I did not learn that or even know that
Yeah.
until way later. And if you look at the research, Kianti, it says that women of color, especially when we don't negotiate, because there's already a gap, just a systemic gap of
Yeah.
wage inequality, gender and race. And then on top of that, we're not even negotiating. So that widens as we get more senior. And it's fascinating because the research says that that could be over a lifetime of wages, $500,000 or even $1 million, some
Oh,
of the research
God, I
says. So it's
bet.
insane. I'm so glad you learned that early. And
Mhm.
I want to come back because I didn't have the white friends and we didn't actually talk about money. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not something we talk about, right? Hey, Kanta, how much you make? Like, how did you
Right.
negotiate? Let me see your letter. That feels uncomfortable. So can you talk about not the tactics, but more the mental piece?
Yeah.
Or even, do you remember back in college how you learned about negotiation?
Yeah.
Was it a book? Was it a dorm room conversation? Anything just to help us with the mental piece and how you were introduced to it so that you could actually execute throughout your career.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think it was dorm room conversation, and I don't even think it was a conversation I was a part of. So I was a resident advisor. I was an RA when I was an undergraduate, and part of that meant you had to work at this activity center, a couple nights a week or whatever. So I was there, and I overheard two white guys talking about, oh, I was offered this much, but I challenged and paid and asked for this much. And the other guy was like, oh, really? I mean, they were bragging, right? Like, it's like, oh, really? I was offered 50,000. I asked for 60 and I got it. And I was like, wait, because I had no idea. Because again, to your point, I think it's just faux pas in general for a lot of families, particularly families of color, to talk about money. And I think that's because it's a source of shame, right? Like it just is what it is. And so I didn't grow up talking about it at all. But when I heard this conversation, I was like, you can ask for more. Like, I had no idea. And so I think when I was going for my first role, that was me practicing. And I'm like, if these two dudes, which by the way, I had classes with these guys, mediocre at best. So I'm like, if they can get more money than me, I'm bright, I'm smart, I'm intelligent, I'm a quick study, I'm all these things, and there's no reason I can't. And the other thing that kind of gave me some confidence, I will never forget, is this first role I was telling you about, right? Like, I go through the interview process. You know how it is. Like, you meet with one person, and if they like you, they move you on to the next, right? So I kind of picked up on that. I got an offer that day. So that told me something. I'm like, oh, they want me. So they can say, this is advertising. Nobody works here. But in my mind, I'm like, well, if they were offering it to me that day, I must be kind of special, right? So again, that's the like, I always talk about the smugness of youth, but that is like, something that actually worked in my favor, because that was forever implanted in me. And I knew from then on out on, I guess at this point, looking back, I was discovering my worth and knew, I'm going to ask for what I'm worth. I wouldn't have used those words back then, but like looking back, that's exactly.
Kianti, I'm picturing you as an RA and you're looking at these mediocre white
Mm.
dudes, probably taller than you. I'm probably not the tallest. And I'm hearing you overhear this conversation, and you're just like, what? If they can do it, why not me? I mean, I have to say that that has actually provided me a source of, I call it inspiration, or just like, what? If you can do it, I can definitely do it. To go for big jobs, because honestly, I look around at the talent, I was like, really, you? What?
Right.
If like you, then for sure me, because I am
Right.
like, I can run circles around you. So
That's
I
exactly
love
right.
that. I also want to talk about the idea of specialness, because you are special. We
Oh,
are
thank
special, and we often don't remember that, and we forget and we forget and we bury it. So to have these two white dudes, and then you realizing, damn it, I am special.
you.
I am
Right.
worth everything.
Right.
And I love that because it's a way of making sure that each time you have these conversations, you are standing up for yourself. So love it. Can you talk about, Chianti, any pieces of advice or just even
Mm.
tactics? Here's how I go at a negotiation.
Yeah,
Here, for example, it's a salary negotiation. I do these 3 steps. Are there any
yeah,
things that you continue to repeat over the
yeah, yeah. I don't know if I can boil it down to steps, but I will certainly try. I think one of the first things I do is, obviously, thank God now, right? When you look at roles, they put the compensation on the job description. So I'm like, thank God companies for doing that. So that way neither of us are wasting time. So that's helpful. But before that became available, I would just start researching like, what is this role making? What about in this industry? So I researched that. And then I figure out it was a little bit of a values assessment that I've just done in recent years, frankly, which to me is determining what's most important to me, right? Because it's not all about money. And I realize that comes with great privilege to even be able to say that. Like I'm making a certain amount of money now that it's like, yes, I obviously want to make more, obviously want to keep making more money, but I know that's not the only thing. It's flexibility. It's like time off, all these things. So I think about those things that I want. And then I almost remove myself from the situation because as a part of my job, I have to negotiate. I have to negotiate deals for, placement on certain media outlets or negotiate, rates, all kinds of things for work. And it just kind of comes naturally for me. And so when I'm thinking about negotiating for myself, I almost think of myself as a product, right? So it's almost like, okay, well, it's like what is the bare minimum I would expect? And what is the maximum that I'm going for? And then I just keep kind of gunning in at that. And that actually took a lot of practice because removing yourself from something and like advocating for yourself is really hard. And I would say, particularly for women. But once I kind of learned to separate myself, and again, going back to what I said earlier, recognizing my worth, it made things a lot easier. So I guess the 3 steps are like research, identify what your values are, what you want, and then just gun for it. Like don't let up. And then the other thing I want to just highlight, because this is something I've been able to do in my career, which again, I guess I know is a huge privilege, is that when I do have particularly women of color come through, I kind of tell them on the side, don't take less than that, right? Like, so even though I might give them, okay, I'm offering you $50,000, when they come back and they ask for 55, I'm like, you can ask for 60. And I know that that is frowned upon, but at the end of the day, like, how else are they going to learn, right? And so then when they come in, I explain to them, this is why I did this. Always ask for more, always ask for more, always ask for more. And I especially drive that point home with women, in particularly women of color.
Oh my gosh, you are a blessing. I wish I had you in that seat because often it is fascinating because I've been in the hiring manager seats or the decision maker seats. People of color, you give them the offer. They're like, thank you so
Yes.
much, right? Oh my gosh, this is a dream for me. And I'm like, you're welcome. White dude, yeah, that's not gonna work.
Mhm.
Here's what I need. And it's usually like twice, it's just like some astronomical amount. And you're like, I can't do that, but I can do this. They're like, fine, you're welcome, and I'm like, thank you, thank you, uh I guess for me. So I just so appreciate that you're transparent and you're helping people because we don't get these lessons, our
We
parents
do
don't.
not.
Yeah, they're just like, be grateful, come on, Chianti, you're like doing something you care about,
That's right.
that's worth gold. I'm like, is it? Because I
Is
can't
it
pay my
though?
rent. Hey bank, here's some passion,
Right. And I can
so
have both, right? Like I think we're often told to choose.
yeah.
It's like I can be paid equitably and do something I love. I deserve that. And I think we're often told to choose and we don't have to. We can have
Do
both
not
of those things.
We do not have to choose. We can get
Mm-mm.
paid and be passionate. Absolutely. So let's talk about more myths. And I'm curious if there's another myth, Chianti, that has really been one that you have either, in this case, you seem to have not really struggled in negotiation, but
Well, yeah.
anything that you have really dominated that's helped you with your career that you can share?
Yeah. Yeah. This is a it feels a little bit interesting me saying this one just given what I do. I worked in marketing my entire career. But I will say marketing myself has been very difficult. And I think that a lot of things underlie that. I think as women, we're taught be humble. Don't brag on yourself, right? Like, again, kind of going back to what I was saying about negotiating, like take what's given to you, don't ask for more, right? And so that has definitely come out. There have been a lot of things that I've wanted to kind of try in my career or like test out, and I just haven't gone for it for fear of being too big, right? Especially, I mean, you can tell we know each other. You know, I'm not shy, right? So I tend to talk a lot. I have a big personality. Like there's a lot, right? And so being told from the time I was a kid, really like tone it down. You're too much. Basically, dim your light, right? And so then when it's time for me to like pitch myself and actually show my full self, that part of those voices come into my head, and I'm like, just chill out, back off a little bit. Everybody doesn't need to know that much about you. So it has been very challenging. And I will say it's only been within the last year or two that I've started to challenge those thoughts and be like, we're going to talk. You're putting your full self out there. You're going to talk about all of your accomplishments. Like, this is not a time to be humble. For what? Who said that? Right? Like, who said humble's good? Like, I don't know. I'm just really still pushing myself on that. So that has been extremely challenging for me. But a good challenge, right? Like I'm enjoying, for the most part, kind of pushing against those ideas and those thoughts to come into my fullness.
What you're mentioning about sharing the full self, and it's hard. It's so mental because it's not like you're on a cliff, right? I'm like, I'm gonna push you off, jump from this
Right.
cliff, but it feels that way. And I want to talk about this sharing the full self, because if
Yeah.
I were to ask you, Kianti, share a hard time, right?
Oh,
Share a time you struggled. You might cry, right? It's hard, right? You and I, we will share, like, I'm going to tell you this really hard story. It's so traumatic,
yeah. Yeah.
but I'll share, right? I'll share the hard things. It's not going
Yeah.
to be easy, but I'll share. But then if I asked, Kianti, tell me about a time that you were just a badass. You just rocked it. You were the best. You were like dominating as you. It's a whole other level of
Mm-hmm.
hard.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I mean, even just talking about it, I could feel myself like, oh, do I want to do that? Like, can I just tell you another hard story? Because I have a lot of those. I want to talk about it because why is it so damn hard? I mean, it's easier to share trauma than it is to like brag on something that you actually did.
Right.
So share for you. What comes up for
Yeah.
you about why it's so hard to share the highs, like your resume of excellence? Can you talk about why that's so darn hard?
Yeah. I mean, I have a couple of thoughts. But I will say, steeping this conversation in my identity as a Black woman, it has been, reinforced that you're not to outshine anyone, right? Because then that makes things so much easier. Because at the end of I mean, so much harder, because at the end of the day, I still work and will probably work again in white institutions, right? And so if I'm to highlight my excellence, that can intimidate my bosses, who are likely white, right? And white women who could then make my job harder. So if I'm just humble and just let them shine and maybe give them, the fuel or the wind beneath their wings, right? Then I'm deemed more valuable and not intimidating. And therefore I can sort of, keep my position or whatever the case may be. Like, that's been coming to me a lot more lately. And it's still true, right? We both know that's still very true. I think as I get older, um, and evolve and grow, I'm less afraid of the alternative, right? So I know my worth. If that happens, if you're so intimidated by me that you boot me out the door, like, I have full confidence that I will, to toot my own horn based on my skills and my talents and my experience, I'll get something else. And maybe that means I'm not working for an institution anymore. Maybe that means I'm working for myself, but I'm not willing to dim my light out of fear of intimidating or hurting someone else's feelings. I'm just not willing to do that. And so that's kind of been what's been the biggest shift in my life.
Yeah, I think that not sharing dims our light is real.
Yeah,
And,
absolutely.
and then sharing too much and feeling the pain of that is also real.
Oh,
And perhaps then that we're not in the right place. We're not in the right home. We're not in the right workplace that actually appreciates our light, and that we are
that's right.
actually a special light. And if it's
That's right.
not the place for us, then it's okay, we're going to leave. And I love
That's
that
right.
recognition because we don't have to suffer. There are other places for us to shine who appreciate us shining.
That's
So,
right.
can you talk to Kianti about a specific example from the past where maybe you have struggled with sharing your light and then you really got out there in terms of especially bragging? Because I want to get to bragging. I want to talk about like what makes us amazing and yes, vulnerability, but like really moving to the bragging edge. Could you talk about a
Yeah.
moment like that where you really got out there and were like, hey, I have lots of to offer.
Yeah.
World, here I
Yeah.
am.
Absolutely. I remember it, not too long ago, frankly, being in a board meeting and just talking about the things that my team had accomplished despite a really small budget, despite not having a ton of resources, just going in and being like, listen, despite all those things, like here's the strategy that I put in place. Here's what we executed on, and here's what we got as a result of these things, right? And what was so interesting to me, it was like, obviously I was nervous to do it again because it was like the bragging thing. You don't want to come off that way, especially like in a room full of white men, quite frankly, right? It's like, oh, I don't want to do this. But I did it anyway. And it's interesting because you could kind of see the room even shift a little bit because it's like, oh, I didn't consider that. Oh, I didn't think about all the obstacles and challenges that you had to overcome in order to get to this place, in order to get to these accomplishments, right? So it kind of, I don't know, framed the conversation in a way that it's like, oh, I don't know. It was weird in the sense that it almost felt like, oh, you do know what you're doing, right? So it was like it felt it was bittersweet, right? Because on one hand, it's like, yeah, of course I know what I'm doing, but it's like on the other, it's like, how did you not know that? Right? I didn't just. Do you know how much harder it is for me to get this job than somebody else? Like, of course I know what I'm doing. So it's like that bittersweet thing. But it felt really good, at least for me, to go in and be like, I don't know if I can curse on here, but like, yes, I am that bitch. I am her, right? And like just stepping into that and letting it be known. It felt good.
It's great to own your worth. And doing
Yes.
it publicly is uncomfortable, especially as like an Asian person. You come up there and you're like, let me lead. And they're like, whoa. And
Right.
you do know that I had almost 5 years in the military and
Right.
almost a 20 plus year career elsewhere. So please, like I can lead. This is not
Yeah.
that hard.
It's not by
100%.
happenstance. I can do this. Yeah.
Seriously, I was like, this is not like it's just 50 people. Like, why are you so nervous? For me, I've done this in front of thousands of people. It's fine.
Right.
So it's
I
both
got
it's,
this.
it's that
Yeah.
bittersweet. You're just like, really, your bar is that low. And at the same time, you're like, yeah, and I did that. And it was really not that hard, honestly.
That's right. That's
So
right.
so that I love that you mentioned that because it's such a poignant example and that you really declared victory. Yes, there are a lot of challenges and we were incredibly successful. That piece is interesting because when you did that in this moment, I'm curious because you're celebrating the team. And so talk about
Yeah.
that because you're not like, look at this, I did it all, or maybe you did, but can we talk about that? Because there is a balancing act. So how did you balance like owning it, but also sharing it?
Yeah. I think that part's important, is particularly as a leader, right? And so, yes, I led the like I put the strategy in place. Yes, it was these were mostly my ideas, but it was also a team effort. But to extend the bragging, right? I lead this team. This team is following my lead. This team, for the most part, right, has learned what they have learned and been able to execute on what they do because of me. And again, I know even saying it out loud, I was like, ooh, that sounds kind of cringy. But it's just true, right? Like we've worked together. Obviously, these are smart, talented, you know, thoughtful, intelligent people. But at the same time, under my leadership, they've been able to grow. I said it, right? And they've been able to deliver on some really important things. So yeah, it is, to your point, it's the balance. It's understanding that it was a group effort. I couldn't have done it by myself 100%. But also, it was me.
Yeah,
I
so good.
did that.
What you remind me of is my first boss, Kianti. His name is Colonel Schieffer. I talk about him a lot.
Okay.
And he would talk about our work, and we were 22. And he would say, look at what Analiza did, look at what Kianti would do.
Yeah.
And it was always celebrating us in front of the generals. And it was baffling, I think, for people so senior to be around such humility, because it was never like, oh, I did this, because he often people did, they would, take credit for the work that was
Yeah.
done behind the scenes. And what I realize now is that every time he did that, one, he got our loyalty,
Right.
because we're just like, oh my gosh, I learned everything from this guy and he's
Right.
giving credit to us. And so we loved him. I still love him today. And then the second part is they knew all along that he drove that
That's
he
right.
produced the talent, that he, because he's that good, got us ready to deliver incredibly complex presentations in front of, the top people in the Air
That's
Force.
right.
So that was always a reflection of him. So it's
That's
always,
right.
yeah. So I just, it's the way in which we lead. It's never about ourselves. And yet it does shine. It is shine. When we shine on others, we shine on ourselves. So
Yeah.
I love it. So Kianti, let's talk about more, because I know this is something,
Yeah.
we both struggle with in terms of just putting ourselves out there,
Hmm.
the full selves, right? And so talk about your work today. I know you're launching a podcast. This has
Yes.
been a little bit of time in the making.
Yeah.
Talk about, let's start with, what did it take for you to take the plunge?
Yeah.
Because one thing about plans, right, Kianti, let's build a plan, a project plan. We can type it up, Excel, status, make it color coded, it'll be sweet. But to go from that to actually pressing the trigger and saying go, and I'm actually going to launch it out in the world, as someone who's been doing it, is still not easy. So can you talk about, for you and your journey launching this podcast, what has been the biggest mind shift to get you actually to get on the field and court with it?
Yeah, yeah, of course. I'd love to talk about that. And I also have to thank you because you are a huge motivating force behind that. I don't even think you realize how much from the conversation we had a few months ago, just challenging me on my shit. That helped. And you're also very kind to say it's been a little bit of time in the making. It's been years in the making. So I do appreciate that. And just finally, recently I've gotten the courage to go ahead with it. I think it was a couple of things. I think number one, I got tired of my own excuses, right? I got tired of my own bullshit, to be frank. I had it was this I was dimming my light, right? Like I know I have a lot of good things to say. I know that there are stories that I have within me that will resonate with so many people. But for whatever reason, I never really understood that the idea around people being afraid of success, right? Like they're not really afraid of failure, they're afraid of success. I get it now, 1000%. It was like, oh, but what is this gonna mean? Is it gonna change all these things, right? Like, and I don't think I realized I was doing that, but that's 100% what I was doing. And I would say, it sounds super cliche, but something happened between like ending 2022 and coming into 2023 that I was just like, I'm living, right? Like I have been surviving for a very long time. I am worth more than just survival. It is time to live. And I'm going to try these things. And if they don't work, that's fine. I'll find something else. And so that bore Black Girls Bonding, which is what it's called. So it's all about Black girls being seen and heard and telling their stories without being typecast, without being, seen as some monolith. We all have like different, rich, exciting stories to tell. And this gives us a platform to talk about those things. So I'm super excited about launching this.
I'm incredibly excited for you, Kianti, because we
Thank
do need more
you.
stories, as much as all the quantitative research, all of that's out there. I know UCSD is incredibly deep with
Oh
research.
my gosh, yes.
It is about stories too, and they're as powerful. Gathering around the campfire to connect as humans, to know that we're not alone. It's
That's right.
so powerful, especially times like this where
Yeah.
we feel isolated. I'm very excited for you.
Thank you.
I want to go back to this idea of fear of success, because it's one that we might have heard of and maybe we've contemplated before. We've definitely heard the idea of fear of failure. Can you
Yeah.
talk more about that? What comes up for you that no, it's not actually fear of failure, it's fear of success, and how did you know that for you?
Yeah. You know, God, I think a lot of things kind of came into play. I had a life that I planned when I was like 8 years old, right? And it's so funny because obviously my rational minded self knows that it's ridiculous to hold on to the dreams of an 8 year old. I had like such limited like exposure to things, but still in the back of my mind, I was like, my life is supposed to play out this way. And it hasn't. Like almost none of the things that I wanted at 8 have come to pass, right? Surprise, surprise. But like my life obviously is so much richer and better and brighter and all those good things. Um, and I think that's what it was. I think it was recognizing that success does not look just one way, right? Like there are plenty of paths, and then also recognizing the pivot. So I think part of my fear of success meant grieving what I thought was success before and coming up with this whole other idea. And to be clear, right? Like one of the things is children, right? Like I just thought I was going to be able to have kids. Like I assumed it. I lived my life as if that were the case. Like, you know, on and on and on. And my husband and I tried for years, and it didn't happen. And so, in order for me, I had to release, right, like that dream, and come up with a whole new one, and determine my own metrics for success with that. And that was scary because it's like, but this isn't what I want. I want that. Right. So it was like the fear of actually loving this new, like, I didn't want to let go of the old life that I had for myself. So that's what it kind of meant for me. It's a little bit complicated and layered, which I'm sure it is for a lot of people, but like really gravitating and holding on and reaching for a success in this new way meant I had to let go of a lifelong dream or lifelong goals that I meant for myself. And I just wasn't ready to do it. And it wasn't until this year that I was like, I'm doing it. I'm going for it. Right. Like, and my new mantra has been, I'm living the life I got. I'm living the life I got. I can't live this life that I thought I was supposed to have or wanted to have and all that good stuff. Like that's not living. That's surviving. Now it's time to step into what I have, which is a lot, right? I read something recently, a grateful heart attracts many miracles. And I'm seeing that play out every day because I'm so grateful for the things that I do have. And I'm now ready to let go of the old to grab a hold of the new.
There is a piece of having to empty the barrel to receive new that we have to name, because often we're just like, move on, look at the chart, pros and cons. Obviously, moving on is the right thing to do. And you're like, yeah, that makes sense. But it also means that we have to let go of something that was basically our heart,
Yeah.
to have children, to
Yeah.
have it in this way,
Yeah.
to be a certain kind of person. It's hard. It's identity leaving. And
Oh
we
my
often
gosh.
like have to
Yes.
grieve, right? We grieve for people who've left us, but also that includes ourselves,
That's right.
grieving the person we thought we would
That's
become.
right.
And that only in that grieving process and the letting go do we allow ourselves to open up to possibility of something
That's
new.
right.
So it makes sense to me that it took time, because as much you looked forward, you're like, oh, but still I'm held back. So it's quite difficult, but yet freeing. And I want to, it's quite, I hope that you're celebrating the
Oh
letting
yeah.
go. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I feel lighter, right? I'm not carrying that burden that, my God, that I strapped to my back at 8 years old. Like that's not even fair for me to have done that. So
Real.
yeah.
So Kianti, I want to move to lightning round questions.
Mm-hmm.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Chocolate or vanilla?
Vanilla.
Cooking or takeout?
Cooking.
Climb a mountain or jump from a plane?
Oh gosh. Climb a mountain. I don't, they both seem awful.
Have you ever worn socks with sandals?
I have. I grew up in the 90s. Of course I did.
How would you rate your karaoke skills on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being Mariah Carey?
Oh, 4.
What's a recent book you read?
The Yellow Wife.
What's the favorite way to practice self-care?
I get facials once a month. It's my thing.
What's a good professional development that you've done?
I just recently took a course on storytelling with the color comms community, and it was great.
Hmm. What's your definition of a boss mama?
Just someone unapologetically themselves.
What advice would you give your younger self?
You're not too big. Your light is not too strong. Shine, shine.
I feel like that could be a song. Where can we find you? LinkedIn?
Yes, I'm on LinkedIn, Kianti Brown Whitney. You can find me on Instagram at Kianti B. And check out Black Girls Bonding coming in April. So yeah.
Awesome. And then any final ask, recommendation, or parting thoughts to share?
No, I think that's all I got.
Kianti, it's been a pleasure. I'm thrilled about your podcast.
Oh, thank you,
Can't wait
Analiza,
to
for being such a fierce supporter. I appreciate you.